My name is not Andy. I'm Steve Marks. You might remember me from the keynote with the red shoes and the hello world. I'm just here to introduce Andy, actually, and talk a little bit about the work that he and I have done together and that the companies, Microsoft and HP, have done together. So HP and Microsoft have actually been great partners for some 20 years now, doing a wide variety of things together and sort of creating solutions for small businesses, for enterprises, and for consumers. And this is just sort of the latest example of that, is the work that we've done together with Windows Azure as a platform for this project that Andy's going to talk to you about today called Magcloud. And what's particularly interesting, I think, about the Magcloud project on top of Windows Azure, aside from Magcloud itself being a kind of cool thing that you'll hear about, is that Magcloud was an existing project that was already running out on the web by the time that we started working together. So this was really our chance to, as a proof of concept, take an existing service, do the work necessary to get it running on Windows Azure, and then see what that was like. So Andy can tell you a lot about what that experience was like, what he learned, what went really smoothly, what didn't. And so I hope that you guys find that pretty instructive. And I'm going to turn things over to Andy, but before I do that, I want to show you this one quote from Russ Daniels. And Russ Daniels is the CTO at HP of Cloud Services Strategy. And basically what happened is we talked to a lot of the execs from Microsoft and HP got together and said, look, we're both exploring this cloud opportunity together, from hardware to infrastructure to software. What's a project where we can kind of kickstart this, where we can test the waters, work together and see how it goes? And that's kind of how we landed on Magcloud. Magcloud is just the first effort between these companies to really come together and explore the possibilities of cloud computing in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Andy and let him tell you all about what we've done.
Thanks, Steve. Is my mic on? Okay. Just a little bit of context about Magcloud, because if you go to magcloud.com, you might not tell from the branding, but we are an incubation from within HP, so we're fully owned by HP. We operate from within the parent company. I'm not sure many of you come to PDC to learn about magazines, but let's talk about magazines. We're all familiar with them. We see them every day in the store, on newsstands. We subscribe to some. We get them in our PDC goodie bag. They rescue us when we're bored out of our skull at the doctor's office. In Magcloud, we like to summarize the state of the magazine publishing industry like this. So 3.6 billion magazines were delivered to US newsstands last year. So that's just US, and it doesn't include subscriptions. That's a whole lot. 2.3 billion were. Anybody want to fill in the blank? Yeah, very good. Never read. So someone on our team did a calculation. If you lined all those magazines end to end, yeah, that's enough to circle the globe 18 times. Oh, man, right? What a bunch of waste. Let's say you're an advertiser and you've bought ad space in these magazines. So what are you thinking now? So 62% of what you invested in, so 62% of those ads were never even seen by a reader, let alone the right reader that you were trying to target. So there's a lot of inefficiency in the system. We know that. So HP makes commercial digital presses, and it turns out that we can remove a lot of that inefficiency in production by making a transition from analog offset printing today to commercial digital printing, because now we can do print on demand. But that's not the only opportunity here. So by combining the digital printing capabilities with web-based services, we actually have the opportunity to completely reinvent the magazine publishing ecosystem online. You may not know this, but magazine publishing and publishing in general is really not a very modernized business. It hasn't been transformed by the web yet. So terrific opportunities here. By transforming this ecosystem, we actually have the opportunity now to allow anyone to publish a commercial quality magazine. You don't have to be a big publishing house with a big budget. The barriers to using our services are actually pretty low. Here are some examples from the Magcloud site today, to give you a flavor of what kind of publications can see the light of day. So Stanford University Athletics Department, in the upper left there, has created a magazine commemorating their award-winning athletes for a particular year, last year. And there's a page for each of these athletes with a summary of their accomplishments, photos of them competing in competitions, and most important, an acknowledgement of their scholarship and the donor who has funded that scholarship. So who gets these magazines? Well, there's an annual awards banquet that's attended by these donors, by the athletes, their families. So Stanford has printed these magazines, distributed them to the donors as really an acknowledgement of their contributions. So it helps reinforce and encourage their donors. Ferdinand has stunning photography inside and on the cover. Is a small independent magazine. It's a travel magazine about the Philippines, and it's distributed here in the U.S. And down at the bottom there, Soundcheck. It's a magazine about independent musicians and bands. All of these magazines are magazines that would not exist today at all. They're fairly niche, low-volume publications. And to actually publish these in traditional magazine publishing, the economics don't make sense. You really need a run length in the thousands to actually start being feasible. So I want to walk you through the publishing and buying experience on Magcloud in a few moments. But first I want to say a few things about what we did with Windows Azure. So Magcloud is pretty new. We launched in mid-June. So we're just over 4 months. So like any good startup, one, we're very small. And number two, we're hyper-focused on growing the business and getting it off the ground. So we don't have a lot of spare cycles. That's really important. What we wanted to do with Windows Azure is learn as much as possible as we could about it in a very short amount of time with very few resources. Implicit in that, not a goal. We did not want to re-architect Magcloud. Just not part of this exercise. And likewise, we're not concerned about optimizing performance or doing proper authentication and authorization. Really, the purpose of this exercise is to learn more about Windows Azure so we know what the opportunities are for us down the road. So here's what the Magcloud architecture looks like today, so our production system. So up at the top, we've got our front-end system. It's an ASP.NET MVC application. And it has its own local database sitting in SQL Server. So that stores some user settings. It's a fairly simple, some would say trivial database. And down below we have the Magcloud platform. This doesn't expose a user interface. It exposes REST APIs. And it has its own local database, the platform database, as well as an asset store. The asset store is not a database. It's where we store large, sort of coarsely grained data, like the PDFs that make up our magazine issues and rasterized images of the pages of the PDFs, those things. And those are stored in the file system on a storage area network. Now, in talking with Steve and others at Microsoft, sort of positioning for this little exercise, we were looking for what the opportunities were for the prototype. And we identified the front end and the settings database and the asset store as low-hanging fruit. Today, though, what HP hosts in the current architecture are 5 major components. So the front end and platform web applications, the user settings and platform databases, and the asset store. We're talking about moving the front end and settings database and the asset store from the platform up into the cloud. We didn't redesign anything in Magcloud to do this, really. It was relatively straightforward. It consisted mostly of redirecting calls to 3 APIs to 3 different APIs, which were very similar. And we did some miscellaneous other tasks to meet constraints of the cloud environment, and a few other things I'll describe. First thing we had to do on the front-end application, well, we were writing log files to a local file system. Can't do that in the cloud. Okay, that's easy. To adapt the user settings database, we had to move from calling link to SQL against our database running in SQL Server to essentially calling link to Astoria against the table store service in the cloud. On the platform, we had to change from making API calls, which essentially created, read, and wrote files to the local file store, to APIs that did the same with blobs in the blob storage in the cloud. It was actually quite simple. We also had some one-time tasks that we had to do to initialize our table and blob storage in the cloud. And we also wrote a utility to migrate all of our existing data, or at least a snapshot of it, from our production system to the cloud storage. So both for user settings and for the blobs. And just to give you an idea of the scope of that work, I think it was, well, with the help of the SDK sample code, especially the storage client, that migration maybe took about half a day to write the code and actually do the migration. So it's relatively simple. Now's a good time to say one other thing we did for that migration. Well, as part of hooking up to the blob store, our platform is actually running in Windows Server 2003. So if anyone's played around with the SDK bits, you know that they won't install on 2003 or XP. So we had to hack the storage client sample to remove any dependencies on the service hosting assembly. And it's pretty simple. Just to give you some guidance, remove the reference, compile, and then go comment out all the unresolved references. So it really doesn't have to depend on that. Then the storage client code works just fine on Windows XP and 2003. It's pretty helpful. Great. Got everything? So now, after migrating those three components up to the cloud, HP is hosting our platform web application and a platform database. Demo time. So I'm going to walk you through right now the user experience on the Magcloud production site. We'll just go through it really quickly. And then we're going to actually demo the cloud version. So as a user, as a publisher, you would go to your Publish tab. And here I'm finding my Stanford Athletics magazine. I'm going to create a new issue. You fill in some metadata. The title, the description. You have a tagline there. By default, it's a little promotional message that includes a custom publisher URL of your magazine. We actually print this on the shipping label that goes on the back of your magazine. So when someone buys it and maybe leaves it somewhere, someone else picks it up. Hey, where'd this come from? They can actually go to the web and find that magazine. The publisher can also override it, though, with their own custom message if they don't want that there. And the most common way to override that is actually to leave it blank. So people doing portfolios and things, they actually don't want any kind of messaging on there, the back cover. We can specify some markup as well. The markup is added to the production cost of the magazine for a buyer. So the buyer will pay that markup, and Magcloud returns 100% of that to the publisher. So if you have exclusive content that's valuable, and you can add a markup of $100, all the power to you. It's not that easy to have such valuable content, though. But we enable it. The next step is you browse for your PDF and upload it. So this is a PDF that you've created in an application like Adobe InDesign or Quark Express. And after you're done uploading, you get this acknowledgement and a choice of 5 next steps, depending on where you are in your publishing process. So you can preview the back page. This will show you the shipping label that we add, which is actually different for single orders or bulk orders. You can preview the page trim. So we support full bleed, which means we actually trim back on the page edges. It's very important to preview your design to make sure that none of your important content is going to be clipped. You can order a printed proof. During our beta, I didn't mention we're actually in beta, but you can order a proof, and during beta right now the production cost is free. You only pay shipping. So that's $1.40. And that's to help encourage people to go out and get those proofs and get into the publishing process. You wouldn't believe how many problems there are in magazines that you don't see in the electronic copy. When you get that hard copy in your hand, boy, do you see those. And then you can go back and edit your metadata, or if you're confident that your issue is complete, you publish it. You get one last chance to change your markup. You can change the privacy. By the way, a number of people publish privately, and what that means is maybe it's a private magazine for your family or a close group of friends. It's not something you want the entire internet to order or even see and browse. So you can keep it private and just order it yourself and do the distribution on your own. If it's public, anyone can come and find it, order it, and we direct ship to them. The United States Postal Service, first-class mail. Notifications are our poor man's subscriptions today. We don't do traditional subscriptions, but if you subscribe to a magazine on Magcloud, the next time an issue is published, you'll get an email notification if you request it. So the publisher here can choose to send that notification out right now. So once the magazine's published, we can come back as an anonymous user or another member, search, and in this case, searching for Olympians turns up the magazine we just published, which is about Stanford Olympians at the Beijing Olympics. We click through the search result to the issue page, where as a potential buyer, we can open a previewer, which can see the content. The images we have here are low enough resolution to not give away the content necessarily. It's generally not readable, but it's enough data to actually get a sense for the layout and the content and what's in the magazine. And the publisher can also control how many pages are previewed. In general, everyone doesn't mind if people preview the magazine, but some people are pretty paranoid and they only allow the first 2 or 4 pages to be previewed. You can buy and pay with credit card or PayPal Express, and you'll get it in 7 to 10 days. Everything's print on demand. Nothing gets printed until someone actually asks or pays for an issue. So now let's switch over to the Cloud app. So Magcloud on Windows Azure. So here we are. I'm not lying. So you see the URL up there. It's pointed at cloudapp.net, not magcloud.com. I'm signed in. I'm going to go to my Publish tab. We're a little slow, and I'll explain something. I'll create my first issue in Andy's Travels. Give it a title, which is Hawaii. I'm going to keep it private. There's a family magazine. And our summer trip to Waikiki. I'm going to, tagline's okay, and obviously I'm not trying to make money off my family, or maybe I am. Create this issue, and now we're going to browse for my PDF, which I created in Adobe InDesign. Upload. Now let me tell you what's happening in this prototype, because it's slow. I want to explain why. So I'm uploading now to our front-end application running in the cloud as a web role. This web role now calls our API that's running out of the cloud. Our platform application now calls back to the cloud to store the PDF in blob storage. But wait, we're not done. Now the platform retrieves the PDF from the blob storage to rasterize the pages. So it creates previews and thumbnails of all the pages in the magazine, which we display in the site, like this one that's coming up. So that's a preview image. So remember, one of our constraints, we're not going to re-architect Magcloud. The purpose here was to expose ourselves to how Windows Azure works, and we're not worried about performance. But that's obviously some low-hanging fruit regarding performance, where we have the potential to take the Magcloud platform out of the loop for certain operations with the large binary data. And here, actually, I think hopefully, if things work out, Steve can show us some evidence that things are actually happening in the cloud and show some artifacts there.
So we have this long-standing joke on the Windows Azure team that we're plumbers. And it's really hard to demonstrate plumbing. Right? So imagine you're a plumber, you've just installed plumbing in somebody's house. What do? You flush the toilet and you go, imagine what's happening, right? And so we're a bit like that. So you've seen Magcloud now running in Windows Azure. How do I know it's running? How do I know what's happening? So Andy and I were talking about this yesterday, and we were just trying to come up with a way to kind of visualize what was going on. And I whipped up some code last night, and we've got a couple things that we can show you. And they're all around how these assets are stored. And they also tie together what Andy was saying about short-circuiting some of this, some of the flow of information now that goes to the cloud, then back on premises to HP data center, and then back to the cloud, and eventually back to the browser. So what I've done here, first I've got up Cloud Drive. And Cloud Drive is an SDK sample in Windows Azure, and it lets you basically use PowerShell to browse through blob storage as though it were directories on your system. So I'm here actually connected to the Magcloud storage account. And in here we have a storage container, and all the blobs are in here. So I could just keep going down this path, and eventually we will get to, did I hit it? There we go. We'll get to an actual individual blob. Now the blobs that are in here are basically preview images and thumbnails of pages of magazines, right? So I created a little web UI that lets us view those. So it's a very simple web page. It has a repeater and just repeats these image tags. The data is all coming directly from blob storage. So unlike in the way that Magcloud is architected now, the way that we've done this proof of concept, here I can go straight to blob storage, get the data back, and we can short circuit some of those round trips. So here I am just using the client, the storage client library that comes with the Windows Azure SDK, and I'm connecting up using the right credentials, and I'm making a call to list blobs that will get me all of the blobs that are there, and I'm just taking the top 16 of those, and I'm doing some data binding. Then I have an image handler that actually handles getting the image, because the blob container for Magcloud is not marked public. And that means the only way you can get to it is if you have the right key. So all of this is actually going through a handler within our web page to go get the data and feed it back. So that way, if we wanted to protect some of the content, we can insist that the user is logged in before they can see blobs, etc. So that is what it does and how it works, and this is just a quick visualization of it. So these are real pages of magazines. They're coming back in chronological order, so they depend on the order that we imported the data the first time, but these are just sort of 16 random images from there, all being served out of Windows Azure. So in the future, one of the things that we've been talking about is, could we take those round trips and we're in this data center, we're back to the cloud. Could we take that out and do some of these, some short circuiting? So let's switch back to the PowerPoint.
There we go. Yes, future investigations. So where do we go from here? So we obviously have some, I think, low-hanging fruit, some opportunities to take the Magcloud platform out of the loop where possible. So today, all of our uploads are going to the cloud, but indirectly through the platform. Likewise, image serving is being done indirectly from the cloud through our platform. Now, when we have native code support, we can also move our PDF rasterization from the platform up to the worker role. So it can be close to the data, which is a good thing. But it also helps us in terms of provisioning and scalability in the future. We don't have to think about that particular bottleneck if we can move that computation into the cloud. That's important for us because the page rasterization is probably the only compute-intensive part of Magcloud. If we can put that up in the cloud, it makes our life a lot easier. And we'd also like to entertain the idea of fully migrating our platform to the cloud and not have to worry about this appendage sort of sitting outside the cloud. The main reason we're not doing that today is our platform database. So we have a reasonably complicated schema, and we have fairly complex data access patterns that just aren't well suited for the cloud's table storage today. Now, we know that there are ways to design your storage and your data access so that it is well suited to the table storage service, but it's not that way today. And it's a reasonably significant undertaking. It was certainly out of scope for the exercise that we did. But we'd really like to investigate that. If we could do that, the combination of being able to move our platform database to the cloud and moving our native code rasterization to the cloud, we could then move our entire platform up to Windows Azure as well. Now, farther in the future, we have these big ideas about Magcloud. What we're doing today is actually pretty modest. We facilitate the publication and sale and distribution of your magazines. Pretty straightforward. But of course, we're entirely web-enabled. We live in Web 2.0. We've got visions of mashups, right? So it doesn't have to just be an electronic mashup. Why not mash up magazines? In fact, our original alpha was running under mashupmags.com. So that is kind of one of the visions that has been driving us. And we know that in that kind of a vision, we don't create all the mechanisms to extend magazines or our platform. We're going to rely on third parties to do that. Now, the problem with having third parties extend your platform, well, take existing platforms. So I love the Flickr API, and I've built applications on top of that myself. But I host them on some sketchy server on some hosting, some data center. And maybe it goes down for 2 days, and I don't even notice it. So can Flickr rely on my extension of their platform in some sort of mission-critical way? Never. So that's a big problem in general in, I think, large companies allowing third parties to extend their platform, at least on the web, is that the extensions are not done in an environment that is scalable and it provides any sort of quality of service that really the main application owner would require. So I think Windows Azure has the potential to offer us that kind of an environment. And in fact, we could even create Visual Studio project templates and wizards and add-ins that would help a third-party developer just from scratch create an extension to the Magcloud platform. Take, for instance, an extension that creates a dynamic page that would be inserted into a magazine. So it could be some mashup of Google Maps or some sort of a Microsoft service too, that returns a page that would be customized for a particular instance of a magazine. And so imagine a developer now, though, just using a project template that we provided that would create a project that would run in Windows Azure. And I think the potential to meet our quality of service requirements are much higher than if we just let anybody develop their extension in any platform anywhere. Let's see. So just to summarize what we did, we moved our front-end MVC application to a web role in the cloud. We moved the accompanying user settings database to table storage. We left our services platform outside of the cloud, but we were able to migrate its asset store to blob storage in the cloud. And basically, we migrated significant portions of magcloud.com to Windows Azure, and all in about 2 engineer weeks. And that's no joke. It really was not a lot of work. I was joking with Steve, actually, the most time we spent was keeping up with the changes to their releases as they were working through.
The joy of early adoption, right?
Yeah,
we were still some distance away from our first CTP, and we appreciate you hanging with us through all the breaking changes that we made during that time.
Our team really believes in learning by doing, and this has been a great example of it. And really thank Steve and the team for the opportunity. It's been really fun.
Yeah.
I'd like to mention that we have a couple of examples of magazines off our Indigo presses, off of Magcloud, that you can look at as you leave.
Let's pass them around. And so Andy and I weren't exactly sure what where people would be most interested in this stuff. So we decided to keep the PowerPoint-y part of this. We'll start here. Kind of short. And we would take this time to kind of open it up and do some Q&A and let you guys drive, what do you want to hear about? Do you want to hear about Magcloud? Do you want to hear about Windows Azure? Do you want to hear about what Andy's guys did to get this thing working? I don't know. We thought we'd let you guys kind of drive what we discuss, and we do it through the form of Q&A. So this slide is to remind everyone that the recording will be available at MicrosoftPDC.com, and please fill out your eval forms there as well. And at this point, let's have people come to the microphones, if you will, and just open it up for a Q&A. Can you just come up to the microphone so the recording gets the question too? I know it's a small room.
Yeah, so it will be very useful to know what does the logical topology look like between these two clouds, or data center and the cloud. Maybe how the data centers are working together between the HP and Microsoft. Mostly when I understand from HP may have its own cloud. So why that decision between where the HP cloud comes and where the Microsoft cloud comes here?
I'm not sure I can speak to a kind of cloud that HP would provide. But we're longtime partners with Microsoft, and in most of our offerings, we tend to leverage what our partners provide as well. So I would imagine that any sort of cloud offering that HP provided would have a Windows Azure story associated with it.
Yeah, and I'll leave this up here. This is also just to answer the question of where did which parts sit in the proof of concept kind of port of Magcloud that we did. This is what we arrived at the end, which is with the front end and the data associated with the front end, like the settings database, right? Living in the Windows Azure cloud, the asset storage, so the blobs, the images, the thumbnails, also living in the cloud. And then this is kind of how those flow together with the existing Magcloud backend platform that stayed outside of the cloud. This stayed in HP.
So I have a few questions. The first one is quick. You showed a command line browser for blobs. Are there similar tools for tables and queues?
For queues, but not for tables at this point. So queues is simple. DIR will show you a list of them. You can actually then get individual queue items from them if you want. It's PowerShell, so then you get all the .NET objects behind it when you do that. For tables, not yet. But yeah, we're interested in doing something like that.
Oh, if everybody could write that?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be thrilled if someone wrote a good one and we didn't have to bother. Yeah.
So Andy, you said your front end was, your settings DB was running on SQL Server.
Yes.
And you were using Link, so that probably made porting easier than if you weren't. But still, you decided to go with tables and not SQL services. Would you mind speaking to that?
That may be more than anything an accident of which team started talking to Andy, right? It's more, so from I was the one who was initially talking to HP about these things, and we just talked about Windows Azure, and we talked about how can we fully utilize the platform, and part of that platform is the Windows Azure tables, and so we went down that road. I think probably for the settings DB, it actually makes a lot of sense because that was
It's very simple. The data access patterns are trivial.
Non-relational.
In fact,
right.
almost any data service would probably fulfill that just fine.
Right.
Yeah. Now on the back-end side, the platform database,
That's the next
my understanding is that schema is a bit more complicated. That's relational. We haven't yet thought about will SQL services be an answer that maybe makes that port easier.
Yeah.
But it seems like that's the sort of thing, just in generic terms, that's the sort of thing that would make a lot of sense to put into SQL services, where you need sort of advanced query capabilities and things like that.
And yeah, the backend was actually my last question. I'm guessing another reason that it wasn't quite as low-hanging fruit is you need to integrate with your printers and other stuff that's not necessarily, that's maybe non-MS or partially MS. So I don't mean to put words in your mouth. That might not be the reason at all, but more generally, could you speak to how you would integrate stuff that lives mainly in the cloud with non-MS or kind of partially MS-enabled stuff?
Sure. Well, at least I can address integrating with our printers, which it's really not an issue. We have a little client piece sitting in the print service provider, the PSP, which also talks to our platform. So it's using our REST APIs to, enumerate jobs, orders, update status, pull down the actual job files for printing. And whether that service is running in our data center or on the cloud The PSP never knows, right? They're just using this custom application, which actually today is just a Windows application, a desktop application using WPF. In the future, they might not even use an application. It might just be a service running in the background. So, thanks.
As an ISV, one of the things I struggle with in this vision is that we cater generally to enterprise customers and have been trying to target the lower end market, small to mid-sized companies, and it seems like the cloud model would be a natural fit there. Deploy our stuff in the cloud and support small and mid-sized companies, but would need to keep our enterprise offering available as well. And it seems to me that there's a distinction here. There's a port required here. There's a big distinction between stuff running in the cloud from a data perspective and an access perspective versus stuff that would be hosted on-premises installed software for somebody. Is there thought to unifying that even more, or making more of the SQL services available to seem more like a natural SQL server, authentication services, same kind of thing?
So I'll give two slightly different answers to this. And one is we absolutely believe in this kind of spectrum of on-premises to in the cloud and somewhere in between where some portions go in the cloud and some don't. We're actually in a really good position to service that entire spectrum because we have the whole suite of server products, and now we're making this heavy move into the cloud, right? So on the one hand, we want to really make that process really seamless of kind of migrating things over, composing things of multiple parts, et cetera. On the other hand, I do want to say that the design point of the cloud is quite different. Right, this design point of horizontal scaling, of managing state differently. So running things in the cloud, I think to some extent is a different beast. So we're going to be a bit of how do we make it easy for existing applications and existing investments to migrate forward or migrate laterally, if you want to see that, into the cloud. And at the same time, how do we encourage the best practices as if you're shifting to the cloud? How do you rethink some things, or how do things get redesigned? What portions of that are the right thing to move at what time, et cetera? So I think you'll see a lot of guidance from us. I think you'll also see a lot of dialogue between us and particularly enterprise customers about what are they ready to move, how do they want to move it, how do they want these systems to integrate. So there's a lot of work ahead, I think, in really making that very cohesive and consistent story across.
Actually related to that in some way is are you able to quantify how many servers you didn't have to buy by going to Azure? That is, there's a cost for pre-production dev test environments. There's also a cost for production environments. And the argument here is, I think, in many ways being made that we'll save money by doing this, right? We don't have to buy a whole bunch of capital expenditures. Yep. So in your experience here, both from a ease of development standpoint, not having to scale internal environments, and also from a live production environment, how many boxes didn't you buy? Yeah. And what aren't you running? Where is your? Do you have a thought on that?
Can you speak to that, Andy?
Well, I can tell you that that's exactly what we're thinking when we're entertaining the thought of using cloud services. And we even have back of the napkin kind of calculations. But to be honest, working in startup mode, we don't really have a good idea of what our costs are, what our persistent costs are going forward. But it's not only just what servers you didn't have to purchase, but there's this what-if factor, especially as a startup. What if you hit that inflection point in your growth curve and you have to scale up really fast? Then, in some cases, no amount of money helps. Right? When you have that cloud at your disposal, the thought is that you'll be able to scale up instantly to meet that demand. So that's a value that, it's hard to throw for us, in our data center, to throw money at and solve. Right? We need a cloud for that.
This question might be a whole other session, I don't know, but how do you ensure that the cloud will not be attacked, and how do you ensure that the data will not be stolen and it's nothing going to be lost?
I think that question is for a whole other session. I think probably both sessions that answer that question well have already happened. There was
Really?
So, but fortunately, at MicrosoftPDC.com, you can download and view all of the videos from PDC. There's a quite. I mean, I don't want to answer it here in too brief of a form. There's actually, I mean, there's a lot to think about. The threats come in a lot of different forms of, well, what if I upload something that's malicious? Or what if someone is trying to do a denial of service attack from outside? What if somebody's just sucking up all the bandwidth? And then on the storage side, the same thing. What if my data is close to other people's data? How do I make sure that only the right people can access mine, et cetera? It's a deep question, so I don't want to answer it too much. If you do want to hang out afterwards, I mean, we can chat about it a little bit. But the two talks that is really, I think, probably best discussed in are a talk by Yusuf Khalidi, and I don't remember the title, but it's basically about the Fabric and the Fabric controller. Architecting Cloud Services. That's my helper in the front row. And then Brad Kelder's talk, which was, I think, Essential Storage in the Cloud, something of that form, where he actually talks about storage. And I think there he talks about sort of the authentication methods, the signing of headers, how we prevent replay attacks, things like that.
That's great.
Any more questions about Magcloud or about the work Andy and I have done together? Did the magazines we passed around ever make it back towards the front?
I'd like to mention that one of our biggest sellers is actually a Ruby on Rails developer magazine, surprisingly enough. I guess there isn't, there's a need there not being met by traditional magazines.
What was the other one? You want to talk about the color one a little bit? Because actually I thought that one was really cool.
Oh, sure.
One of the ones that we passed around.
Yeah. One of the examples being passed around right now was done by one of my colleagues in HP Labs. He's a color scientist. And this is a combination of the summary of results of an experiment he's done, which is a color naming experiment, where he had an online application running where people can come view colors and name them in their own terms, in their own native languages. And he collected all the data and was able to cluster those and find out. He has another application where you can go now and either enter a name and find out what color people assign to that name, or vice versa, enter an RGB color and find out what names people have assigned to that. And this magazine actually summarizes all those results, and it serves a dual purpose. It also serves as an awesome color reference for people producing Magcloud magazines. So if you want to know what this RGB looks like in your magazine,
here it is printed on the same paper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's sold a few dozen copies of this within the color science and vision community. A terrific example of a niche magazine that really has no outlet today, but is actually a very good match to something like Magcloud.
Yeah. Is Azure in this magazine? Have we looked up?
Someone want to check?
I want to know if we got, this is what we think the hex code for Azure is, but I want to see
That's a great question.
If everyone agrees with us. Okay, so if you do want to hang out and talk to us, we'll hang out for a few more minutes. Thank you so much for coming, and I want to give a big thanks to Andy and all of Hewlett Packard for
Thanks, Steve.
coming.